Good evening. I'm Natasha Karamihou, and today we're going to dive into lease secrets. You may live abroad, but you also may own a property in Greece, an apartment, a mansion, a summer cottage, or a store you want to lease. What is the correct process to follow when we want to have our property leased and make sure that all prerequisites and rules are honored according to the respective laws? A 1987 Law Act, modified by a 1994 law, cover and define the lease conditions in Greece for houses, and a 2014 Law Act covers the commercial lease conditions. Let's start exploring specific aspects of leases. Duration. There is a mandatory 3-year commitment for both parties. However, any agreement for a longer term is perfectly valid and legally binding on both parties. It is important to always specify the purpose of the use, as a main or secondary residence, shop, office, workshop, warehouse, parking space, and the business purpose, for example, clothing or car dealership, and not put it vaguely for any commercial use. Amount of rent, rent adjustment. The amount of the rent is freely determined by the parties concerned, in all leases, as is any subsequent adjustment. Commercial leases are subject to a 3.6% transaction fee imposed by the state. Electronic submission and declaration of lease. Lease documents, both original and amended, after the signature, are no longer submitted to the tax office. The landlord is obliged by the end of the next calendar month from the date of commencement of the lease to enter all their information in the Real Estate Lease Information Database of the Public Revenue Authority, printing at the same time a proof of submission of this declaration, which he or she will keep together with the original of the agreement. Electronic acceptance of the lease is then required to be made by the tenant. It is also canonally mandatory to submit a declaration of termination of the lease electronically, which must only be done after the owner has received the keys to the property and not before. Lease agreement. Draft and sign a written lease agreement for each new lease or modification, extension of an existing one. The digital filing of the lease application simply replaces the old endorsement from the fiscal authorities and does not constitute a lease agreement. We must enter the tenant's full identity details, VAT number, details of spouse and any other persons staying in the tenancy, use of the tenancy, and monthly rent. Nowadays, even the new commercial leases are governed primarily by the lease agreement and much less by law. What we need to keep in mind is that the era of lease agreements from the kiosk is finally over. Termination of lease. The only condition for the termination of a lease of a main residence by the landlord is the expiry of 3 years from its commencement. Unfortunately, the phenomenon of non-payment of rent is common today. An expedited procedure has already been established to issue a judicial rent restitution order without a hearing, adjournments, or witnesses against tenants who refuse to pay the rent after being invited to do so by a written invitation from the landlord. Legally, there are 3 ways that can be used if we address to the appropriate court. Termination of the lease according to the Civil Code. Action for expulsion for contempt according to the Code of Civil Procedure, and issuance of an order for the return of the lease without a trial, with or without claiming the rent due at the same time. This way, the landlord may, inter alia, request that the tenant be ordered to pay the unpaid rent, maintenance, and utility bills. The choice of the appropriate procedure in each case is the responsibility of the lawyer of each landlord, depending on the particular circumstances of each lease. Let's summarize with the do's and don'ts when leasing a property. Our property must be suitable and safe without arbitrary constructions and changes of use. Drafting and signing of the private rental agreement is advisable. Issuance and registration of energy certificate data is compulsory. Filing of information in the platform is obligatory. Primary connection of electricity under the tenant's name and then delivery of keys is the right thing to do. Never receive a down payment of rent or security deposit before your tenant-to-be signs a lease document. Do not rent your property to persons who refuse or avoid giving you their full details, name, ID number, VAT number, or give you details of other persons. Do not rent a property to a foreign tenant before you verify and include in the lease the details of the tenant's residence permit in Greece. Do not ever give keys or right of occupancy to a new and unknown tenant before he or she brings you the electricity supply contract under his or her name for your leased property from any electricity provider. And last but not least, never rent a property with an active electric, gas, or phone connection under your name.